think Benson might be possessed by the spirit of Alec, the demon.
What's that? What's the spirit of Alec, Elyse?
We saw The Nun a couple nights ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big horror fan.
So the reason you said that about Benson is because the movie is mostly about the nun ghost going around, sleeping, begging for food. Is that what that demon does?
Yes.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, I just said that because he's horrifying. He's standing in the doorway
He
staring
is
at
actually
us right
staring
now.
at us right
which
now.
is what the nun always does.
So yeah, we saw The
saw
Nun.
Yeah, I love the Conjuring Cinematic Universe.
I know you do. You're very
I'm
excited
really
for
into
The Nun.
it. It's not a great movie. Like, we should lay that out right now.
We are going to review it right now.
It's been a while since we've reviewed a movie. Maybe since The Martian, actually.
Mm-hmm. It's not like we really had a reputation for it. We did it when we wanted, but yeah.
But, I think it's maybe more of a discussion than a review, to be honest, because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff about this movie and this franchise of films.
Interesting. Very interesting.
I can't wait to hear. That I find it interesting.
I do. I'm glad you finally picked something to be what
my
you
thing.
really want to be your thing, and it's the CUCU.
See, the CUCU.
The Conjuring Universe Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you just want to jump right in?
Yeah, we can. I guess, what were your initial takeaways?
Well, I
from
think
the film, and I think we should preface this by saying that due to the nature of us wanting to talk about this as in depth as possible, we're gonna spoil The Nun. We're gonna spoil other movies in the CUCU, including both Annabelle films, both Conjuring films.
We'll do like a thing where we won't spoil it right now. Like we'll discuss it for a little while, and when we're gonna spoil it, we'll clearly indicate that we're gonna.
Maybe I might let some stuff slip.
Well,
I
tried. Okay. Well, I can say that one of my I'll let you man the control panel here.
Well, man, the control panel.
I think The Nun is a perfect example of sometimes separating a fun movie going experience with a good movie. If that makes sense.
With a well-made or like a well-made film.
Yeah. Yes. And I think a big part of it is that when you start talking about the plot of The Nun, it seems really bad. It seems like a really bad movie. But when you talk about the scares, it seems like a fun movie. Those seem like there's two very different things that you're weighing against.
Yeah. I feel the same way. It wasn't like a great movie. I don't think the premise is bad. I think the premise is pretty standard, horror movie and especially possession horror fare.
Okay.
Which is basically that it takes place in 1952, and a priest from the Vatican and then a young nun, an officiate who hasn't actually been taken her vows as a nun.
Which...
Her name's Irene.
In terms of the overall movie's goals, I didn't understand why she wasn't a nun.
Because I guess, there's a process to it.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know why. These are the kind of, plot things where I was like, what was the point of her not being a nun or about to be a nun?
I think it makes the character a little bit more interesting, I think. That's another interesting point, because that could be something that I think it ties into the mystery of a nun herself, right? Which is so concealed, and she has this relationship with God that's kind of a mystery to heathens like ourselves. And I think there was an added dimension to making her not having accepted her vows and kind of being that vulnerable in that little window of her not being a bride of Christ.
So you felt like it was definitely a character thing.
Absolutely.
See, for me, go ahead. No,
it may come. the way that they're weaving this cuckoo.
Weaving.
It could,
like it's some sort of masterful craft.
It is a patchwork quilt of terror. And the way that they're weaving it, like, that could be... Because we'll get into that later, because for me to discuss this, I need to talk the spoilers, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, for me, it didn't feel like a character thing. It felt like the opposite, which I think is a strength of the movie, that they basically had these moments. They want certain scares to happen. They want certain things to happen to certain characters, and they want those moments to happen, and then they wrote the movie afterwards to reach those. So there's a moment where her not being a nun yet allows for a cinematic catharsis, as it were, but it really has no bearing.
And we can get to that, but I should finish describing what the movie's about, because it kind of derailed it. But so this young soon-to-be nun and Vatican priest, who he's an exorcist. He's conducted previous exorcisms. They are sent to an abbey, this like giant old castle in Romania in 1952, because there's a kind of spoiler, I guess. There are nun deaths happening there.
Well, there's a suicide.
So I didn't want to say, because you made this whole delineation between.
It's not a spoiler if it's the first scene of the movie.
I didn't know it was gonna happen. anyway, so yeah, a nun commits suicide, which is like, I guess if you're a nun, that's like the worst sin you could commit besides boning. I don't know what's worse.
Finger banging is.
Yeah, I don't know what's worse.
Unless it's God's hand, then it's okay.
Like in Sister Act.
If you get a dildo that's shaped like Jesus's dildo, is it not okay?
Like the one that he used.
The one he used, because he was a carpenter.
Well. So yeah, so there's, and then no one really hears from the nuns in the abbey. It's like a whole thing. So, and you might be asking, like, why has this young, not even nun been chosen? It's because she has, she's sort of ordained in such a way that she has a history of known visions. And that's kind of what's interesting about her, is that there's a moment in the movie where Irene, who's played by Taissa Farmiga, she talks about how, her family wanted to commit her because she had these visions, these premonitions, whereas, they went to the church, and the church said, "Oh no, this is like a holy vision that you're having, and this is you're blessed by God, and you should become a nun, etc." So like, there's a reason why you might think like, what's special about her? That's, I guess, why she's chosen.
And just to be clear, she is the young version of the woman from The Conjuring.
She's not.
What?
Lorraine Warren.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize this until the last scene of the movie, because I watched that whole movie, and this is why I wanted to talk about like spoiler stuff. I watched that whole movie because the dates add up, right? Because we get to Annabelle, which is 1967, which is sort of like, right when you start to sort of see the Warrens. You see them in The Conjuring for the first time. But Lorraine Warren, it times up, right? That it's like 20 years after the events of The Nun. And it seems really coincidental that they got... And then this is where I'm like, is there a bigger thing that they're doing here? Because the nun's name is Irene. Her name, Vera Farmiga's character from The Conjuring, is Lorraine Warren. But then they're not supposed to be the same character, but then I'm wondering, like, because the movies, they do this thing where they go back and they re-edited a scene from, I think it's The Conjuring 2, where they show the Warrens doing, like, an exorcism of a French farmer from the demon Valak, Valak is like the demon that possesses the nun, or not possesses, that is the nun. It's kind of like the big baddie of the
spoilers.
Yeah, I know, these are all spoilers. That's why it's really hard to talk about like the CUCU without really just diving deep.
Because it's like, all
Valak is sort of like being set up to be the big baddie of the CUCU.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Valak is the demon that personifies as the nun, and at the end of The Nun, they tie it to the CUCU by showing this scene that was in Conjuring 2, I believe, where it's the Warrens doing this exorcism, and the guy that they're doing the exorcism of is the French farmer from The Nun, the Frenchie, and they kind of re-edit and redub some of it, so that way they call him Frenchie in that scene, and they you know, they go back and do movie magic on it. And Frenchie, you know, if you've seen The Nun, he had the upside down cross like burnt into the back of his neck, so clearly like Valak was using him as a conduit, and that's how they're tying that together. And so there's all this speculation where like I'm there's no reason that they would have cast Taissa Farmiga, Vera Farmiga's sister, who is 20 years younger than her, unless there's supposed to be some connection. But they're playing it off right now as if they are two different people, whereas I'm wondering if there's some sort of case of amnesia going on, or like something like that. Well, because
they're not even two different people. They're if they are two different people, they're two different people with the same face.
I know.
Yes. Because the two of them are identical.
Yes, and that's why I'm saying, like, it wasn't a coincidence.
And they also have the same magic power.
I know.
Which, again, you could do whatever you want in the CUCU, but it's... I was watching the whole thing going like, oh, this is her, like, previous life, but then obviously she moves out of it, and they even deal with her as a not yet fully nun, kind of dealing with, like, temptation of, like, ooh, maybe I would rather get some hard D.
But then there's stuff where, like, you know, when Lorraine is painting the nun,
she doesn't know.
She doesn't say like, that's Valak.
Yeah,
you know, but she knows from the character Irene in the Nun knows that that's Valak. So I think it's like, unless Vera Farmiga was like, you can't use this footage of, or you know, you need to cast my sister in this, or she like lobbied for, but I think it's like,
it's intentional.
No director, James Wan, no director would be like, yeah, let's cast your sister that looks exactly like you, and you have the exact same age gap between you as that would take place in the timeline of these movies, and you have the same power, unless Irene is like her sister. Like, that's the other speculation that I've seen, is that because
sister.
I watched that whole movie going, oh, this is the prequel to that. They're showing us Lorraine Warren's backstory of when she was going to become a nun, because also the Warrens are very religious in like the Conjuring movies. So I was like, oh, she was going to become a nun, didn't, and they got married and
met the perfect man.
I love Patrick Wilson.
Yeah.
But you know, they got married and they had a kid. But then I got to the end of it and I'm like, oh no, her name's Lorraine. We just watched her get called Irene for this whole movie. There are scenes with like, and there's like an emotion when they cut to Lorraine during that exorcism, and she's reacting to Frenchie. But yeah, it was like, so there's got to be something else.
We're talking big picture though.
Yeah, we're talking CUCU.
But talking specifically on the nun.
Yeah.
So they go this nun that's been chosen by the church because she has magic powers goes with this priest who deals with this kind of shit all the time.
Yeah, about 5 years ago, he performed an exorcism on a little boy that he's a little bit traumatized by because the boy died. Didn't
go great.
Yeah.
And so he's doing this thing. Now, here's where I think as a good movie, it starts to... It's not... I wouldn't say it's a good movie, but it still remains scary. Because from this point on, in terms of plot, it's basically... It's basically like a Scooby-Doo kind of level...
Of trope and
of like, okay, let's just go. Maybe we just go.
Yeah.
Like they literally go to the place, and then like there's very suspicious things that are immediately starting to happen. But then they're like, well, maybe let's just stay the night or a couple nights.
In their defense,
and hang out.
They are in the middle of mid-20th century Romanian countryside that they got to by a horse and donkey.
Yeah.
Or a cart, a donkey, or like a horse and cart, donkey and cart.
Yeah.
So it's like, I get where you'd be like, I'm not just gonna pick up my phone and get an Uber and leave.
No,
this
yeah,
castle.
but technically they do have an Uber in that the French farmer is there.
The French farmer, though, he sort of like abandons them. He gets spooked.
Well, they tell him to leave. They're like, we're
leaves,
fine. You come back in a couple days.
Because they've got the power of God.
We'll be fine here. And they actually have a pretty nice place. They have like this sweet little like 2-bedroom, this little 2-and-2 or something that they hang out in.
There's the abbey and then there's the adjacent convent, right?
And almost immediately freaky stuff starts happening.
Yeah.
But this is where the movie's good, in my opinion.
So you kind of see the freaky stuff like a mile away for the most part, which isn't bad, like, that you can call it. Because to me, what these movies always succeed in is the imagery.
Mm-hmm.
It has a few more jump scares than I think the CUCU traditionally has had.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, like, there's something freaky about the nun just being there and popping out. But I liked it, and I was digging, like, any time that there was going to be, like, you know, because I was nudging you, but anytime that there was going to be a very obvious scare, like, coming, I got really excited.
Yeah.
It's very fun.
Yeah. I think, it definitely has more jump scares than your average CUCU, I think.
Yeah.
But there are some good dread moments, and then the imagery, there's a certain thing that kind of happens towards the end without completely blowing it out of the water. There's a situation that happens at the end where someone walks into a room, they're looking for someone else, and everyone's concealed. Everyone in the room is concealed. You can't tell who they are. So it's a perfect setup. It's like when you're walking through like a maze of mirrors or something like that, or a bunch of mannequins, you don't know which one's going to be what. And then it feels very almost video gamey in a lot of ways at certain points.
It's so spooky.
But yeah, everything in between, all the connective tissue. Something that this movie does that I don't think other ones really do, though, it has flashbacks, right? Like, the CUCU has always kind of acknowledged that like...
CUCU got a few flashbacks.
That, like, hell, evil, demons, angels, God, everything exists, right? All these things exist.
Especially because the Warrens, they are themselves very religious.
But there is a moment where I can't think of any other movies that do this in the CUCU, but there's a moment where someone's telling a story about what could be a religious story or a religious parable or some sort of thing, folklore, but they show it, and they show it in a very realistic manner, and it involves a bunch of knights, Templar or whatever, coming back from the crusade, kicking open a door, going in, battling a demon. Like, it's very explicit, and some of those things are like jarring.
It's jarring, but I think it was essential because the nun is essentially the origin of the CUCU. Like, if you think about it, Valak being the big demon baddie of this whole CUCU, the nun sets it up because that Knights Templar, and I don't think it's Knights. Is it Knights Templar? But it's like whatever.
They were coming from
Knights
the crusade or whatever.
Were on the Crusades. That they unleash this like dark force on the world. That's the setup. So this is like the origin point. Unless there's something that like they make a movie that goes even further back that shows the knights doing their thing. I think this is going to be like the origin point going forward. Like if they do another movie, maybe they'll do like Frenchies. They'll go back and they'll do that exorcism. They'll probably do like the Warrens, their daughter getting possessed. Stuff like that. But I think this is like the setup, the entry point for that, and that's why they were like, okay, we're gonna show you where this evil came from, like how it actually was birthed into the world. It
just felt very cartoonish, which is saying a lot coming from a movie about a demon nun.
It like
felt when you compare where things get to in like The Conjuring, which is like based on a true story, like it still has demons and exorcisms and stuff, but it starts with like based on a true story. This one clearly doesn't do based on a true story. It's like this one just goes like the year's like the 50s.
Because like the two Conjuring movies are like adapted from like the Enfield haunting.
Yes.
True, like kind of based in real things that sort of happened. Yeah, this is just sort of because I think wanted the story.
Even Annabelle, there's a real Annabelle. I thought the Warrens had this doll.
They did, yeah, I think so.
And so they were like, oh, you could actually, if you wanted to, Google Annabelle, but you can't Google anything about the nun.
No.
There's no basis for anything, which doesn't necessarily is not a check against it. But when they started doing those flashbacks, and they were like, this is what happened during the Crusades, where there was this guy who opened up a portal to hell. I was like, oh, they're really being way more explicit.
Yeah, I think, and like I said, I think that's because this is now like the main origin of like where this whole evil started. But I also think that feeling jarring and tonally like implosive is a product of somebody that's great at making horror movies and going, make a scene with knights and it's like, it's gonna probably like feel weird, and visually maybe that director and cinematographer are like, we don't really ever shoot, you know, medieval historical stuff like this, but that's the thing. I guess it gets a grace for being like a necessity to this universe.
I just think it's a how to print money kind of thing. I will say this about the overall CUCU. The overall direction, I enjoy watching these movies. I think we've seen all of them in theaters except for the first Annabelle.
Yeah, which is maybe the weakest.
Which I also would agree is the weakest of them all. But we've seen them all in theaters. I think... you're going to pull up Annabelle?
I'm going to pull up Annabelle Creations. There's something I want to mention from it.
Okay.
But go on. You think that...
I think that this one feels the most like they've maybe run out of... They were not expecting this to be a franchise. And I think this maybe feels like they've kind of run out of stuff to do. All these Annabelle and the Nun are way scarier before. I
admire them being like, to me it's very admirable to be like, we're gonna find a way to weave this all together, and we're gonna have to go back and like gerrymander this whole universe to this one point. Like, that takes some skill with narrative, and obviously like they doctored the scene that they used from the previous Conjuring movie. I like the way that they're weaving stuff. Like, I always think it's fun. They have the nun from Annabelle Creation. There's a picture of her in the Abbey.
Wait, what? The nun from
so
Annabelle?
The nun from this movie.
Oh, yeah.
So there's the implication that she was in Romania, maybe at that Abbey. I don't know if that's ever actually like said in the movies. But like stuff like that I really like. And
it's fun. It's fun because you don't normally think that way. Generally, you'll get one horror franchise. It's fun to think about because, you know, with the first, I think it all comes back to the first time you saw The Conjuring. The movie's creepy, but when they were in their house and they went into that room, you're like, oh my god, that's like terrifying. This is like the nightmare version of in the first Ghostbusters, all that, the traps that they keep everything in.
But that room is so unique because they built like, it's like in a, like building a weird hub world for the Warrens where they can just go back to that room and like cherry pick weird artifacts and things to make movies in this universe. I actually really liked Annabelle Creation.
We watched it in very good conditions at a drive-in, but it did feel like it had some more slower creep things.
I forgot about that.
But it had some like creepy things, like where first of all, the girl is in a wheelchair for most of the movie, so anytime you like...
You don't like wicker wheelchairs?
Well, it just more anytime you like, you know, it's Rear Window, when your protagonist or your point of view is handicapped in some way. Confined, like, it's already starts in a wacky thing. Though I will say this about the Annabelle movies, if we're just talking CUCU in general. They never do anything with the doll. The doll, they always do like demon stuff. Like, oh, well, it might as well be a ghost, or it might as well be whatever.
I think that the Annabelle Creation, the prequel to Annabelle, I think it did more interesting stuff with the doll than Annabelle did. Like, there's this, I don't remember the full context of the scene, but there's this one shot in Annabelle Creation where the doll is... Like, the door closes behind the girl's looking out the window or something, and the door closes in the room behind her, and the doll's in the background. I don't know if you remember that.
I mean,
it was genuinely creepy and good.
I remember the doll being present in things, but, like, never really, like... It wasn't like Chucky, which is good, but...
Yeah, because I think you cross the line where it does become, like, a weird thing as opposed to scary.
So, The Nun. Twists and turns. How'd you feel about the twists and turns? You know,
a lot of it was pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, the biggest twist and turn for me was realizing at the end that was not Lorraine Warren, or not in what they want us to think.
Mm-hmm.
Man, this woman Bonnie Aarons that plays the nun.
Mm-hmm. I thought that was a man.
I thought it was like, I mean, I didn't even know what I thought it was, but that's her.
Yeah, she has a very...
She's very striking features.
Yeah, she's like
that
a model.
Yeah, that I feel like you dress them up. Oh my god, you dress them up and you can get that kind of product. I actually like, there was stuff that I think should have been like pretty offensive, like Frenchie, Jonas Bloquet. That character could have been like just ugh, but he was fine.
He was fine.
You know, I didn't have it. I wasn't like recoiling at any of the character tropes or stuff. Damien Bashir.
Well, that's what it felt way more like they're transitioning the whole, like with the whole Annabelle and everything, they're transitioning it into a more pretty standard horror. James Wan has a pretty unique stamp that he has put on the horror movies that he's made, which are slower, less jumps, more disturbing imagery that's just kind of there to unnerve you, and when you think something scary is going to happen, it doesn't. Where I would say The Nun is very much when you think something's going to happen, it will.
Yeah, and the thing that was great about, like, I kind of group these movies in with the new crop of horror that came with, like, the Insidious movies and Sinister, which is movies that don't rely on sound design and music cues and door slamming shut to tell the audience that they should be scared. And The Nun definitely does that more. But I don't know, I think nuns are like they're not a new horror trope.
No.
Or villain.
I grew up terrified of nuns.
Yeah.
My mom went to Catholic school,
Yeah.
so she was like, "You got to watch out for nuns. They'll hit you with a ruler."
I don't think I've seen this since I saw it like in theaters.
But like scary moments from the original Conjuring are her being locked in a room with a light and then the light going out, like her candle going out. Like those are like more the scary moments. Stuff like that. Yeah. Stuff where you're just suddenly seeing someone hanging,
But like... you know I appreciate that The Nun will do, I think, is obviously it's trying to set up more of the CUCU, okay?
Of course.
And if Irene and Lorraine are actually the same person, or Irene is Lorraine's sister, oh god, Jesus Christ. Or I forgot about so much of this. We should watch these again. Or we find out whatever that connection may be.
Yeah.
I think the Warrens are really like, they're so likable. Yeah. Right? And I like following their, like, I don't think there's a movie franchise I can think of where it's like there's this couple that we could be the new Warrens. I think let's go out and solve paranormal mysteries.
I'm the emasculated husband.
Yeah. I really like them, and I'm up for more like adventures in the Warren universe. So if The Nun set up the movie that we're gonna get, about the exorcism of Maurice the Frenchman, then like I think that's really welcome.
Yeah, well, so the next thing that's coming out, just to kind of get everything, the next one that's coming out is Conjuring 3.
And
right?
They're making a Nun 2.
And of course they're going to do a Nun 2.
They're making who's the guy, the ghost from Conjuring 2? It's like something man.
Oh, I don't know. The Babadook. The Warrens go after the Babadook. I want to see the Warrens take on other movie monsters. Warrens versus the
Crooked
Wolfman.
Man. Remember the Crooked Man? They're making a Crooked Man spin-off movie.
They did a really good job, like, turning some of these things into creepy stuff.
They did a great job.
But I do think that this is going to be scarier than the whole Crooked Man movie, I'm sure. But yeah, so we should probably, so final verdict or whatever, final thoughts on The Nun. and your expectations for the cuckoo.
It's the perfect time of year to go see The Nun and to turn your brain off and have a fun, scary time, and just enjoy the creepy imagery of that movie, and also give yourself the background that you need to continue to enjoy and embrace the cuckoo.
Not as scary as I remember.
Yeah.
CG.
Yeah, but that is The Crooked Man, and I believe he's getting a spin-off feature. I think is there another Annabelle? There's gonna be another Conjuring for sure. There's definitely another Nun.
They're gonna kill this into the ground.
The Nun had the biggest opening this weekend for any of the cuckoo.
Really?
Yeah. Like opening, so it's on its way to making like $50 million ish.
Well, if you're thinking about seeing the next piece of the cuckoo, we're gonna say if you like horror movies, you should. If you like being scared, The Nun will scare you.
Yeah.
You do have to turn your brain off a little bit.
Yeah, you kind of have to buy into a lot of the like exposition heavy way the characters speak to one another.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's almost October.
It's almost October.
I like this sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So, and I like seeing you like scared. Like
I don't get scared. What are you talking about? I get scared. I don't get scared. I'm never scared of nothing. Except for this video going on for too long.
It's great. I can talk about the cuckoo forever.
We have to perform an exorcism on Benson, so we're gonna go. Thank you guys for watching our review of the cuckoo. Cuckoo in review
view.
Our review view of cuckoo.
Cuckoo in review view. And we'll review the next one probably.
We'll probably do it. Yeah. Thanks for watching.